see you guys in the dark.
I was 18, fresh out of high school, and I had a job setting sales leads for the vacuum cleaner salesman over the telephone. Monday through Friday, I'd drive into the office where I'd set the day's lead for a staff of 4 weird middle-aged losers. The elderly guy who ran the place became outraged by the lack of sales and brought 2 company fixer types in from New York. The younger of the 2, we'll call him Jim, was slightly older than I was, but he was already considered one of the best salesmen in the company. Jim and the older New York guy hired a bigger and better sales team. One day, they wanted to take the new sales guys around and show them how it's done. They invited me, claiming that I should see what they do for a living. Also, Jim was hoping to show off by selling several vacuums in front of the new guys, and wanted me around for moral support. Like a kind of muse, I just went along. Jim racked up a sales total of nearly $10,000 before lunchtime. Everyone was taken back to the office. But Jim wanted to get more sales because he was on a I can't lose streak, and he said to me, "Come along and watch him work." I hesitated because it sounded like a drag. He told me he'd mess with people's heads for our amusement if the sale seemed unlikely. Then it sounded like it might be fun. Jim drove around an area packed with trailer parks. He told me to look for the ones that say no soliciting outside. I told him we could get arrested going into a park like that. He said it's the best for sales because it scares the competition away. He spotted a park with an anti-soliciting posting and drove into it fearlessly. Jim parked his company-providing Cadillac, and we got out. The place was nasty, with trailers crammed together. It was obvious that the trailers I was looking at had been there for years, if not decades. Jim pointed to the creepiest looking one. It was uncommonly dark, shaded heavily by a nearby tree while the rest of the park's trailers were bathed in sunlight. I felt a growing tension in my gut the moment I laid eyes on that old, dilapidated trailer with the rotting little front porch. Jim said it'll be an easy kill, sales-wise. I said it was a bad idea. He gave me an expression that equated to, "Don't be a puss." I grudgingly followed him. The closer we got to that trailer, the more dread I felt, especially when I saw that there were about 24 stickers on and around the front door that bore the text like "No soliciting," "Private property," etc. One actually read, "Do not disturb." Jim knocked loudly and persistently. He was wearing a suit and tie, and was holding a long, thin green cardboard box with a fancy writing on top that said, "A gift for you." Inside were a serrated steak knife and a large cutlery knife. The type that always feels weird to use because it's kind of that horror movie villains always use. The door opened, and there stood a 3.5-foot tall dwarf. He had a full head of silver hair and was wearing a little red sweater vest over a striped shirt. He was also donning a pair of slacks and shiny brown shoes. Frankly, the little dude looked pretty sharp, and he had a big, infectious smile. He gave us a warm hello, and stood enthusiastically before us with the door wide open. Jim bent down a bit and asked the aging dwarf how he was doing. The dwarf cheerfully exclaimed that he was just fine, and smiled at me. I smiled back and nodded. Jim took the top of the knife box and showed its contents to the dwarf. He explained that all he needed to do was come inside and demonstrate the new model of vacuum system. The dwarf delectably took the box of knives and studied them up close. Suddenly, while smiling, the dwarf pointed to a cluster of the no soliciting stickers near his door and said, "So I guess you didn't notice the signs, you damn solicitor?" The dwarf's smile left his face instantly and was replaced with a crazed, wrathful expression of pure hatred. His jaw even trembled violently with rage. Jim grinned at him before trying to resume the spirit of the exchange prior to the dwarf's sudden tone shift. The dwarf kicked ineffectually in Jim's direction and yelled, "You get out of here, you filthy solicitor!" Jim started laughing, but I was creeped out. Jim reached out to take his knives back, but the dwarf pulled them away. They were his now. I could see that Jim didn't want to give up so easily, especially since he'd explained on the drive over that salesmen have to buy the knives up front from the company. I slightly grabbed Jim's upper arm and gestured towards his car. "Let's go," I said. Jim finally turned and we walked away. The large psycho-style cutlery knife came flying between our heads and landed on the pavement ahead of us. Jim and I stopped and looked at each other in disbelief. We turned and saw the dwarf lowering the arm which he had just hurled the blade with. "That little prick," yelled Jim before he started back towards the dwarf's trailer. The dwarf retreated a step or two. I blocked Jim with my arm and forced him towards his car while telling him it wasn't worth it. Jim picked up the cutlery knife and tossed it overhand style towards the dwarf. "I think you dropped something," he said, his New York accent in full effect. Jim had to get into his car first and unlock my door from inside. He was overweight, so he moved a bit slow. I watched as the dwarf cautiously grabbed the cutlery knife off the ground and trotted back into his trailer. Jim finally unlocked my door, and I pulled it open. Looking back at the dwarf's trailer, I noticed that he hadn't shut his front door yet. Jim started to light a cigarette, and took his sweet time doing it. I got in, and noticed the car keys were in his lap, and not in the ignition, which really bothered me. "Can you believe that shit?" he asked, smoke blowing from his mouth. "That was a freaking brain stain." I was just starting to reach for the car door to pull it closed when I noticed some movement in the direction of the trailer. The dwarf ran out of his trailer at full speed, holding the steak knife in his left hand and the cutlery knife in his right. He was looking ferociously into my eyes while sprinting towards my side of the car. He was poised to attack me, assuming without mercy and with extreme prejudice. Panic-stricken, I grabbed the handle of the car door and attempted to pull it shut. This will sound like an exaggeration on an already credibly straining tale, but the door bounced open again because the seatbelt clasp got in the way. I'll never forget that little detail because in that instant I almost sharted. It's also when the dwarf emitted a haunting battle growl, which sounded like a small child trying to imitate the Wolfman. "Freaking close it," Jim cried. I jerked the seatbelt out of the way and yanked the door shut. Jim was fumbling with his car key hurriedly into the starter. The dwarf was a mere 30 feet away from my window and was closing in fast. Jim finally started the car. I locked the door a moment before the dwarf started pulling on the car door handle. Jim shifted the car into drive and stomped on the gas. There was a lot of gravel on the pavement, and the car's tires spun into place for several long seconds. "Easy," I yelled. The dwarf looked hateful into my eyes and started stabbing at the window, the tips of the knives slamming loudly against the glass over my face. He grunted like a wild animal during the attack. He must have stabbed at that window 15 or 20 times with each knife as Jim eased the car towards the main road. Jim stomped on the gas again, and we took off rapidly. I turned and looked back to the dwarf, who stood angrily at the entrance of the trailer park with his knives hanging on his sides, and that same expression of unbridled loathing he had when he initially turned into a soaped-up version of the dwarf in Don't Look Now. We pulled into the first bar we found. It was my first time in a bar at that time. Being that I wasn't old enough to drink, I'm glad they didn't card me because I needed to throw a few back. Strangely, neither Jim or I even considered phoning the police, which is likely because of the tequila we'd consumed. Looking back, I wish I'd informed the cops about the extremely dangerous micro-psycho. Back in 2010, I had moved into my first apartment alone. Before that, I had always lived with at least 2 or more people, so I was pretty excited to finally have my own apartment all to myself. I didn't live in a particularly bad complex, and it was a decent-sized 1-bedroom. In this complex, we tended to get a lot of people going door to door selling stuff. Knives, and things from catalogs, magazines, stuff like that. I brushed them off because it usually seemed shady, and I really hated door-to-door salesmen. Well, one morning around 9, I was getting ready to go to work, and I heard a knock on my door. It was some guy selling magazines. He launched right into it, and told me that he gets dropped off by his leader and walked around the city to different complexes and homes selling these magazines. If he sold a certain amount, he got to take some trip or something. He was probably like 5'9", normal build, and kind of greasy looking blonde hair. Like the bright blonde hair some people have. He was very charismatic, and seemed like a nice guy, but I told him I wasn't interested. He pushed, and showed me the kind of things that they offer, and there were a couple that I actually did like to read, and I could get them at a discount if I signed up. What can I say? The guy was nice, and he was around my age, and seemed pretty genuine. Why not help him out and get discounted magazines? So I let him in, and we proceeded to fill out some paperwork and all that jazz. He made small talk with me, and asked my age, and how long I'd have my ferrets and stuff like that. We ended up talking for about half an hour, and I told him I had to leave for work. So he gets his stuff, says thanks, and leaves. At this point I was a server in a chain restaurant, and I was working a double that day. A couple hours later I got off and came home. Just when I had gotten changed and sat down, there was a knock on my door. It was that magazine dude from earlier. I thought he may have forgotten something, or maybe the paperwork hadn't gotten finished, so I opened the door. He said hi, and I asked him if he'd forgotten something, and he said no. I just enjoyed talking to you, and I've gotten my quota for the day, so I figured I'd see if you were home, and I wanted to hang out while I wait for my leader to come get me, if that's okay with you. It was a little weird, but I figured it wouldn't hurt. I mean, I've got neighbors above and beside me, and across from my door and whatnot. I felt pretty safe. I did tell him I was working a split that day, and he couldn't stay very long. He ended up hanging out the whole 2 hours I had off, and he left when I left for work. While he was there, we talked about life in general, and I asked about his job. He traveled for it, and said he and his group were only here in town for a week or so. Then they go somewhere else to sell the magazines. I thought it sounded pretty cool. He started to confide in me that he was tired of it, and wanted to have a normal job, and other stuff I can't really remember. I just told him if he feels that way, he should just quit, and go home. We got off on another subject after that, but I figured that was the last I would see of him. That night at work, I get a text from out of a state number that I didn't know. All it said was, "Hey," smiley face. So I replied back, "Who is this?" It was the freaking magazine guy. At first I wondered how in the hell he got my number, but then I remembered that paperwork he had asked for. I kept cool about it, but at this point I'm officially weirded out that this stranger is getting in contact with me so much after not even really talking a lot. Or for that fact, not even really knowing me at all. I asked what was up, and he asked what I was doing. I told him I was working, because that's why I had to leave earlier. I guess he thought I was lying because he asked why I was at work so late. I told him it was because I closed tonight. He said, "Oh, okay. Well, I'm just chilling in the hotel room." I put my phone away and got back to work. I didn't care what he was doing, and I didn't care to talk to him anymore. I just finished work, got off, and went home. As I walked up to my door at the apartment, my neighbor was sitting outside with her husband on their porch. We weren't close, but we were friendly. I said hi, and she asked me if I knew some blonde guy. I said no. Why? She told me some guy with blonde hair came by knocking on the door while they were outside earlier, and asked if they knew when I'd be home. It was that freaking magazine guy again. I told her how he'd come back earlier, and if they see him again, don't ever let him know I'm home. Her husband says he'll keep a watch and make sure the guy goes away if he sees him again. I thank them and head inside. I'm pretty weirded out at this point, and I just try to let it go. There's no way he'll try to come back again, and I can avoid him for that few days he has left here if he tries to come back. I assume he wouldn't though, because, you know, what kind of weirdo does that stuff? So the next day, I didn't have to go to work until about 5 p.m., so I sat around and hung out all day, and did some cleaning. It was a Friday night, and we usually got pretty busy at work. I had a mild drinking problem at this time, so before I could go into work on weekends, I would have a couple of drinks beforehand. Not to get drunk, but I would be a lot more social and outgoing fun with customers. It's around 3 p.m. if I remember right, and I'm in the middle of the drink and feeling pretty good when someone knocks on my door. I forget the worries of yesterday, and I just waltz over and open that thing up. Not looking through my peephole at all. Guess who? The freaking Blondie. Of course, in my slightest tipsy state, I'm all like, "Hey, what's up?" He tells me he got dropped off at the complex across the road and wasn't having much luck, so he figured he'd stop by and hang out with me again. Screw it. Come on in. Why the hell not? We have a couple of drinks together and talk for a couple of hours again. And he keeps talking about quitting his job and getting a normal life and all that. It's then I start to wonder why he keeps calling it a normal life and why he calls the group leader a sponsor. Sometimes he starts telling me how cool I am and how he wishes he would meet more girls like me. He says he likes the city I live in a lot and the people seem very nice. Just a bunch of stuff like that. I started feeling kind of weird around him because he kept sitting closer to me and seemed to be getting flirty with me. At this point, I decided I was done with this dude, and I wasn't answering the door for him anymore. I told him I had to get back to work and have a good night. In reality, I didn't have to go to work for another good half hour or more, but I just wanted him to go away and out of my apartment. Work goes great, made mad tips, came home with no incident, and neighbors didn't say anything to me. The next day I'm out running some errands, and I get a text from Blondie again. He sent me like 5 or 6 in a row, asking where I'm at, and to open my door because he's outside. Now he just left his job like I told him to, and he needs a place to think about things, and how he knows I'm inside because he can hear me. First of all, I'm like, what the hell? But second of all, I never told him to quit his job. I suggested that, and never offered to be his fallback plan. I told him I'm not home, and to just leave. He says he can hear me inside, and knows that I'm lying. He's pretty much freaking out over a text message, and saying that he wants to move in with me, and start a new life here in the city. He doesn't have money to fly home, and he barely has money for food. He starts calling me over and over again, and leaves voicemails, and keeps texting me. He finally says he'll just wait on me to get home, and we can talk about it. No, I don't think so. I kept telling him he completely misunderstood me, and he needs to go back to his job. I don't want him around, and I don't even know him. I was just being friendly when he wanted to chat. I didn't want him to full-blown move in with me, as I am getting all these messages and stuff I'm driving to a sporting goods store. I don't have the money for a gun, and really at that point didn't know how to go about buying one, and definitely didn't know how to use one either. But I did know how to swing a bat. I played baseball for about 6 years. I can swing a pretty good bat. So I bought a bat, and I was shaking when I put it in the back seat of my car. Still getting texts from him. I stopped reading them at this point because I was getting too upset, and I didn't even know how to reply or to deal with somebody like this. I didn't want to go home yet because I was afraid he was there, but I didn't have anyone to call to help. I drove up to the park and sat for about an hour, and finally decided to just go home. He wasn't there, but my neighbor's husband was outside when I got there. He said the guy had basically been beating on my door for almost an hour, and they threatened to call the cops on him, which I guess is what finally made him leave. I thanked him and went inside my apartment. After that, I never heard from him again. I don't know what the hell was wrong with this guy, but he has some problems. I kept the baseball bat next to my front door from then on, and is next to my front door even now. Unfortunately, I've had several run-ins with creepers. Not exactly something to brag about, but it has made me hyper-aware of who around me is a threat to my safety. My first experience was when I was 11 years old. My parents worked together in their own business, and we're in this process of turning the garage into an in-home office, but still had an office about 20 minutes away from home. Dad had to go out of town a lot, but Mom was always home when I got back from school. One day I ended up getting sick, just a bad cold, when Dad was out of town, Now, Mom wouldn't just go to the office. She had to answer phones and such, seeing as she was the only one there. She figured I was big enough to be on my own for a few hours, just from about 8 to 12. That would be enough time to get some work done and handle any important business she may have. Now, I was an only child and really attached to my mom. I was the kind of kid that would wait in the car while she went into the back and sit there in my seat, fearful of everyone that walked by, sure that my mom had been attacked and would never come back to the car. Of course, that never actually happened. But when you are a kid, rational thinking is not your strong point. So, my mom assured me that she would be back before noon, and reminded me to keep the doors locked and to not answer the door for anyone whatsoever. So, she left, and I settled down in front of the TV watching Nickelodeon, snuggled in my blanket. Maybe an hour later, the doorbell rings. I'm frozen on the couch, and I wait for the person to leave, but they ring the doorbell again. Just breathe, I tell myself. They are probably just a salesman, and will leave soon. A few minutes pass, long enough that the average person would figure, hey, no one's home, I guess I'll be on my way. The doorbell rings again. This time I get up and slink my way to the wall to look through the cut glass panel on the front of the door. Sick day and all, I am only wearing a tank top and panties, so I'm not about to rush over to the door in order to see who is at the door. I have to lean my head past the wall. As I lean out, I see a man looking through the glass. I jerk back and press myself up against the wall, praying he did not see me. Still hoping he will leave. Up till now, there is pretty much no rational reason why I am freaking out. It's just someone at the door. Up till now, he sees me and begins knocking on the door and ringing the bell in earnest. By now, 5 minutes have already passed. Open the door, honey, he calls. Come on, now open the door. I don't move. Open the door now, he begs, knocking louder. I look to the door, and he is peering in at me. Bang, bang, bang. I wince at each fist fall. Now, as a child, you are instinctively driven to obey your elders. He is getting really mad, and I begin to falter, thinking perhaps I will get in trouble if I don't open the door. Maybe he would tell my mom I was bad. I walk to the door with my hand outreached, ready to open the door. He continues telling me to open the door, sometimes firmly, sometimes in a sweet sing-song manner. At the last possible second, my instinct kicks in, and I jerk my hand from the lock. Open the door now, he yells. Open the freaking door, right now. Open the door right now. I run back to the living room and do a little freak-out dance as I try to figure out what to do. He continues to pound mercilessly at the door, screaming obscenities and telling me how much trouble I will be in if I don't open it. He has now been at the door for about 10 minutes. I hesitate calling my mom. I don't want to get in trouble, and I know that she is at least 20-minute drive away and can't really help me anyways. I remember that our neighbor 2 houses down is retired, and she usually is home. She doesn't really like kids, but at this point, I feel like she is my only hope. She has hawk eyes and a penchant for being in everyone's business, so I'm sure that she has probably already seen the truck parked out front. In my panic state, I can't remember her number. He is now throwing his weight into the door. I grab the telephone and scramble to dial the number. After 3 agonizing rings, she answers. Hello, Maureen? It's Nikki. There is a man at the door, and he won't go away. He's been here a long time, and he wants me to open the door. She tells me not to open the door, and she will be there right away. Thinking back, I am sure she could hear him through the receiver. I hang up, and within a minute, the pounding stops, and I can hear him talking to someone. Maureen comes rushing into our yard, asking him who he was, and telling him to get the hell out of here. And at this point, I open the door. He is slinking towards his white pickup truck with a topper on the back, his hands up defensively. Hey, relax, lady. I'm just trying to sell some meat. I'm just a meat salesman. See, look at my truck. He keeps his hands up while moving to the truck. Do you want to buy some steaks? You've been selling meat to an 11-year-old for the last 10 minutes? Get the hell out of here before I call the cops. I had always seen her as kinda scary, but she was my savior that day. She ushered me back inside and called my mother, who rushed home. He never came back. I am not sure if they ever called the police. I still get leery when those guys come around selling meat. It is amazing how manipulative these predators can be. They know their victims and prey on their weaknesses, waiting for you to make one mistake that will give them access to you. I have read many stories, and the common thread I see is, he seems to be nice at first, or he was really charming. I thought he was just overly friendly. They know how to talk to you to get what they want. Think of it like a hunter. Hunters disguise themselves to blend in with the prey's surroundings. They hide their scent, and even make sounds, or use bait to attract their kill. Remember, you are the prey. Learn to listen to your instincts, and never be afraid to hurt someone's feelings in order to stay safe. Don't become an if only. If only I had asked someone to walk me to my car. If only I had gotten on the elevator with him. If only I had told my manager about his behavior. If only I had called out for help instead of feeling embarrassed. Your safety is worth more than the opinion of the stranger. Sure, you may be wrong. Perhaps they really did just need a ride home. But what if your instincts were right? What if I had opened that door? Would I be telling you my story today? I lived a few blocks away from our neighborhood grocery store, and would regularly walk there to purchase refreshments. Considering the fact that I was 12 at the time, it gave me a sense of independence. This particular afternoon, I was accompanied by my friend, Lauren. As we entered the parking lot, I noticed a somewhat shabby car parked towards the perimeter. As we walked closer, I could clearly see two men sitting in the front seats. They began to exit their vehicle and proceed to ask if we would like to sample perfume they are selling. My innocence exceeded my intuition or suspicion regarding the situation. After verbally agreeing without Lauren's consent, I advanced closer to the salesman. I was no more than 10 feet away when I felt the firm grasp of her hand on my wrist. With a stern voice, she announced we weren't interested in their perfume. Then she proceeded to quickly pull me towards our destination. While watching the news a few days later, I saw an interesting story about an arrest that was made. 2 men had disguised chloroform as perfume and attempted to drug, then kidnap young women. I can't prove the validity of their intentions, but I am beyond thankful Lauren was there. Weird men attempting to sell my friend and I perfume? Let's not meet again.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.
Okay, let's set the scene. I'm a 6th grade band student, 12 at the time, and I'm at my private lessons with my teacher for once. It was mid-December, and I was notified that since it turned out my mom hadn't paid for my lessons, I wasn't allowed to take them. Unfortunately, by the time I learned this, the late bus that would drop off after-school kids already left. I had tried to call my mom with the school phone. She didn't buy us any phones at all because she never trusted us. But she wasn't answering. I decided, screw it, and just started walking home. Now the layout of the area is like this. The front has a circle for drop-offs that lead to a road. This road also has a church towards the right of the school, if you look directly at the front. This road has another road that goes straight to the other side. On the opposite end of the road, there's a car wash and a mini mall. And on the other end of the road the school leads to in the front of the church is another, smaller church. I don't know why, there just is. It borders the suburbs most of the kids lived in. When I'm about to cross from the parking lot to the suburbs, creepy salesman just jumps from behind me. He was a white, male, blonde, with brown eyes. I don't know what exactly he was wearing, but we'll just be safe and say he was wearing normal clothes. This is the conversation we had. Hey. Me turning around in confusion, with some surprise. Yeah? You want to buy some Christmas presents? I'm not a stupid kid. I've heard a multiple of scary stories about serial killers and all those other things. This guy immediately tipped my creepo radar by the gazillions. Not only that, but I'm a 12-year-old kid with no job in obvious student attire, at like 9 to 10 at night, and dark outside too. Now, as I internally decide it'll be a cold day in hell before I do any interacting with this fellow, I answer with this, "No, man, I'll see you later." After that, he just walked off. No pleading, no further interaction, no other creepy things. Just went away after that. I walked away quickly too, picking up a big stick I ran into just in case he came back. I started getting really paranoid as I walked back home, scared that he would end up returning with determination to do whatever he may have planning with me. I started to panic when I remembered just how far my apartment was and the actual route I would have to take to get there. I decided to walk back, returning to the front to see my mom yelling my name in tears. When we saw each other, we did the stereotypical running and hugging thing in the movies. We both started crying. I would recognize that she was scared, and I started apologizing. She said that it was okay, and we went inside the front office. We told the front office ladies I was fine. She had asked for their help in finding me before I came back. I ended up learning that my mom noticed that I wasn't at home and came to the school soon after I left, had called all her friends to help find me in our apartments, and got some staff to help her look for me at school. We drove home, and I told her everything that had happened. She wasn't mad, and she was glad that I handled the salesman situation the way I did. When we went home, we let everyone know I was found, and that was the end of it. We never called the cops, but we still tell this story from time to time. I still have the stick, and if I look around, I can find it and show pictures. I never saw or heard of him again. So, to the creepy salesman who walked up to 12-year-old me at night trying to get me to buy your Christmas presents, let's not meet again. So this might be long and filled with useless info that I haven't thought about since it happened. Only now that my brother asked if I remembered what happened when we were younger. When I was 13, I'm now 24, my family and I, my single mother, older sister who was 16, and younger brother who was 8, moved into a 2-story house across town. So it's Saturday, our first weekend there, and my mom and sister had gone to visit my other sister about an hour away, and would be back in the evening. A pair of brothers, who were 13 and 16 that we grew up with, who lived a few houses down from our old house, came over to check the new place out. It was about noon, and we were upstairs showing them around when we heard knocking at the front door. Mitchell, as we call him, the older brother, said he'd answer it, and I went with him. It was a middle-aged man, and he immediately asked if there was any adults home he could speak to. Mitch told him our parents were at the store, and they'd be back soon. The man was holding a 3-pack of Febreze cans, and said he was selling them, and wondered if we'd be interested in buying some. Mitch told him no thanks, and if we needed some, our parents would be getting it already. The man thanked us for our time, and told us to have a good day. We went back inside, and I watched him from the window as he walked down the road and turned a corner out of sight. But it stuck out to me that he hadn't gone to any of my neighbors' houses. I brushed it off and went about my day. At about 5 p.m., Mitch and his brothers left just as a couple of my other friends came over for a sleepover. My friends and I were getting upstairs in my room, putting stuff away while my little brother was in his room next to mine watching a movie. By this time, it's probably about 9 p.m., and getting dark when we hear a big thwack downstairs coming from the back door. I instantly got a pit in my stomach and felt it drop, and my mind went right back to the man that was here earlier. I went downstairs quickly into the kitchen to look at the back area where the door was, and I could see the shadow of someone moving outside. I turned to the kitchen light to alert them that someone was home. I was afraid to call the cops because I thought my mom would get in trouble since we were home alone. I ran upstairs and hid my brother in the linen closet, telling him not to make a sound until I came back. There was a small window halfway up the stairs that had an AC unit in it. It was old, and the top window was really dirty and hard to see out of. I sat down next to it and could hear whispering outside. That's when I figured it was more than just one person. I tried peering out the window, but it was hard to see. And I guess one of them tripped my neighbor's motion lights. That's when I realized why I couldn't see outside was because one of them was trying to see inside. The light only illuminated his outline, but I could see he was pressed against the glass with his hands cupped trying to see inside. I screamed at the sight, scaring him. I called the cops then, and they showed up just as my mom was getting home too. The cops said that they had gotten a few reports already of men going to random houses trying to sell Febreze. So, random Febreze salesman, let's not meet again. This is kind of long, so please bear with me. When I was a freshman in high school, I used to walk home every day. It was a very long walk, and I always took super busy roads because it was the quickest way home. Seeing people on the street never set off my radar, even though I lived in a quiet neighborhood. This one day, I had been walking home and had noticed a guy standing on my street corner. I usually didn't pay attention to people, but he reminded me of the track coach at school, and for a moment, I thought it was him. He wasn't, but just had similar bright red hair and a blue shirt on. It also looked like he was on the phone, but he wasn't saying anything. I only lived 2 houses in from my corner, so when I got to my driveway, I glanced back at the man who was now staring at me. At this point, I was a tad weirded out, but I figured he was waiting on someone and was looking for them. My sister is 3 years younger than me, and my mom worked weird hours at the time, so I used to babysit my sister every day after school. Even though she's younger, she's way more brave than I am. An hour or so after I got home, I hear the doorbell ring and a knock at the door. We knew it must have been a salesman because no one ever uses our doorbell, but I glanced through the door just in case. Sure enough, it was the guy I had just saw standing on the corner. He didn't have anything in his hands that might have indicated he was selling anything, so I simply ignored him. Maybe a half an hour after that, I hear the doorbell and another knock at the door. Confused, I glanced in the window again. The man from earlier stood there, looking around my porch. I told my sister to call our older sister, and that there was a weird guy on the porch. My sister, who lived about an hour away, told us she'd be there ASAP, but to tell the neighbors about the weird guy in the meantime. Neither one of my neighbors answered their doors when I knocked, and I didn't see the guy on the street. An hour goes by, and I figure the man left the neighborhood. So I've calmed down and wasn't expecting anything. Until there was another knock at the door. This time, pretty forceful, and the doorbell ringing. My little sister promptly hid in the back room and called my older sister, who alerted the police. I sat in their living room, hoping that he wasn't going to try and come in the house. Well, he didn't try to come in, and the police end up coming by the hour later. They try and explain to us that it probably wasn't anything, just a salesman, and not to worry. My sister, who is 12 at this point, looks at the officer and says, "He came by here 3 times. The officer's face fell, and he was quiet for a minute before saying, "Well, he must be persistent. If we see him in the area, we'll ask him to leave." Then they went on their merry way. The guy never came back, and I never found out who he was or what he was doing. I never even saw him on the street when I knocked on my neighbor's door, or when I glanced out the window. Maybe he was just a persistent salesman, but I really, highly doubt that. This encounter happened when I was about 10 years old. My sister and I were home alone since it was during the summer. And both our mom and grandmother were busy, so they could not stay home with us. We were used to being home alone during the summer, so it was not a big deal. The only thing we could do as we go outside, or open the door if someone knocked, During this day, I had gotten up and started playing The Sims 2 in our kitchen. My sister was watching TV in our den. A few hours into gaming, I thought I heard the doorbell ring. At first, I thought it was my game. I had turned off the sound, so I asked my sister if she heard the doorbell. She replied, no, she hasn't. She said it was probably just the show she was watching. I brushed it off and went back to playing my game. About 10 minutes later, I see a reflection on my computer of a man in a suit, his hands cupped around his eyes, looking through the glass doors behind me. I turn around to face with the strange man I had never seen before. I had no idea how long he had been watching me. He waved at me like he knew me from somewhere. I called my sister's name, who had not noticed the man yet. She grabs the house phone, quickly calling our grandmother. Now we had seen Salesman before. None of them looked like this guy. He was wearing a full-on black suit that did not fit him. If not strange enough that this guy was wearing a full-on suit in 99-degree weather, he was also carrying a briefcase. All the salesmen that I have ever seen were only holding a clipboard, or maybe a couple of flyers. But this man had a briefcase. The next flag that came with this guy, he walked around our house to come to the back door, which during his little trip, he would have seen there wasn't a car in the driveway, indicating no one was home. As I was getting up to hide, the man reached down and grabbed the doorknob. He started to jiggle it forcefully. Thankfully, the door was locked. He looked at me smiling, gesturing me to come unlock the door for him. All the noise he had been making had now set off our 75-pound lab mix, making her go batshit crazy. No way she was going to let the guy get to us if he did get in. My sister tells me our grandmother is on her way, and she wants us to hide in the back of the house in her room until she got home. My sister hands me the phone, then runs into the kitchen to grab the biggest knife we have. I can hear her yelling at the guy that we called the cops. She comes back into the room with me, shuts the door. She tells me after she lied to the guy about calling the cops. She said that he started laughing, like she just told the funniest joke he had ever heard. A little while after we hear the door open and my grandmother calling us, we came out to meet her. She tells us she did not see a man anywhere in sight. She walked around the whole house before unlocking the door. She also thought it was weird if he was a salesman, he would have left a note saying, "Sorry we missed you." She ended up taking the rest of the day off to stay with us, also so she could watch to see if the man would come back around. It's been 11 years since this encounter, and I still don't want to know what was in his briefcase.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.